You're listening to 3 Days Through the Wood, a novel by Bear Mawasagi, as read by the author. Chapter 3 Butcher, Baker, Honeymead Maker. "Well, you two sure are here early," the old man grumbled. Yellowed teeth peeked through a tangle of brown hair as he spoke. "Or late, depending on how you look at it. Reckon we only got a few good days of weather left before it starts getting real cold out there. Where did you say you were headed again?" Pill and Chirp were seated at a large, empty table, one of a few set into the main room of a large cabin. The old man with them towered near to the ceiling, made larger than life by the heaps of furs draped over his broad shoulders. Aside from the three of them, the hall was devoid of people. "Down the road a ways," said Pill. Most folk passing give that same answer," the old man mused. While he was overly large, even for the overly large cabin, at least half of his bulk was carried in his joyful smile. It was broadly visible even through his beard, and had perked up considerably at the sight of the two young travelers. "Why not stay here a while?" I asked him. "The skies are growing grayer every day. Better to hunker down with a good fire, a good meal, and some good company, wouldn't you say? I don't know what's down that road that's so interesting anyway." "We're going to town," said Chirp. He was halfway through his second bowl of a thick and hearty stew, which was actually Pill's first. The old man had set 2 bowls down on their arrival without asking for anything in return, pulling them from a large cauldron set over a roaring fire before they had even asked. He also sat them near the fire so that they could dry off proper. Pill shivered beneath a small black shirt while his fleece hung by the fireplace. He felt almost naked without it. From the road, they had judged this place to be a restaurant, or perhaps a small inn of sorts, but they had yet to see any other customers arrive. They hadn't even been asked for any kind of payment, not that Pill could have given any. His pockets were as empty as his head was of memories. "Now, are you two headed to some town in particular, or any old town at all?" the old man asked. Dragging a plush and heavy-looking armchair behind him as easily as if it were a footstool, he sat down at the end of their table. "Sorry if I'm sniffing around too much where I shouldn't," he said jovially. "Been a dearth of travelers come by lately, what with the ending of the season and all, and it ain't often I see 2 fine young men like yourselves walking the road all unaccompanied like. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? Most talks start with introductions, and I ain't done any of that yet." He offered them a grizzled paw. His fingers were near thick as Pill's wrist. "I'm Pill," said Pill, timidly shaking his hand. "And this is Chirp." "I'm Chirp," said Chirp. "It's a nickname." "And Pill is too, I'm guessing." The old man smiled. "Good names, both of them. They fit well. Like mine. Mama named me something else too, but pretty soon she would just call me Gristle, 'cause I was tough, you see, but also kind of stringy. Like you!" He clapped Pill on the back and nearly sent him sprawling out of his chair. "Course, Gristle changed too over time. Nickname got a nickname, and soon people were calling me Grizzly." "Pill's helping me find my mum," said Chirp, "and I'm helping him find his way to town." "We're not lost," said Pill, more than a little defensively. He quickly wished he had said nothing at all, and shot a look at Chirp. They didn't know anything about this place or the man who ran it, and despite his hearty greeting, meals, and even the sharing of his fire, Pill didn't see much reason to trust him. Certainly not enough to justify opening up about how they were traveling unaccompanied through the wood with no idea of where they were or where they were going. A selfish and paranoid part of himself was eyeing the food with great suspicion, and keeping a careful eye on Chirp to see if anything happened. Pill had yet to eat anything for himself. "Do you have any more?" Chirp asked, holding up the now empty bowls. "Big appetite on this one, eh?" said Grizzly. He clapped his hands together and laughed. "Tell you what, come on back, help me roll out my day's bread, and you can keep a few loads for yourself. That sound good? Walking is hungry work, you know. Best not be doing it on an empty stomach." "Do you have a car?" Pill asked. "Never cared much for the things," Grizzly huffed. He lumbered across the main room with a few short steps and hunched under the divider into the kitchen. "Never saw them go anywhere I couldn't get to myself. Where do I need to be so bad that I can't just walk?" Pill shrugged, not knowing how to answer the question. He never cared much for cars either, he thought, although he wasn't sure why. He had less of a memory of vehicles in particular, and more the vague sense of an uneasy fear. Still, he might be willing to face that fear if it meant getting out of the woods sooner. The walls were glowing warm with firelight, burning brightly on the central hearth. The cauldron was still bubbling. The old man had dropped an entire bowl of freshly chopped vegetables into it just as they arrived, roots and tubers and other things that looked more fresh and green. The steam and smoke set into the stone walls like a coat of paint, glistening the room with a warm and inviting scent that called all the way to the road beyond. Chirp was quick to follow the old man into the kitchen. Too slow to stop him, and too responsible to leave the both of them alone, Pill followed after. "Do you happen to have a telephone, then?" he asked. "No, ain't see the use for those either. No one to call." Grizzly shrugged. "Got a yellophone, though, you want to see?" he added, starting to chuckle. "No, that's all right," said Pill, suspecting the joke. Chirp, however, took the bait. "Show me." The old man laughed some more before opening a nearby window and letting loose a great bellow that shook the birds from the nearby trees. Chirp was startled at first, but quickly joined in. Now it wasn't just a yellophone, but a cacophony. "Now we just wait and see if someone answers," Grizzly beamed. Pill couldn't help but notice with some dread that, even if they were to scream as loudly as they could, it seemed no one was nearby to hear them. The kitchen was large and full, stocked with preserves and spices and all manner of things crammed into high-rising shelves. The old man was quick, reaching blindly for unlabeled packets and jars and containers and mixing them into wooden bowls with absolute confidence. He didn't seem to see a need for measuring anything, and soon 2 sticky blobs of dough were forming in his hands. Given that the both of them, mostly Chirp, had accepted the hospitality of the old man, it seemed impolite to not help him now. Luckily, bread baking turned out to be a surprisingly easy and even somewhat fun endeavor, at least with proper instruction. Chirp threw himself into it immediately, quite literally as he dug his hands through thick bowls of dough all the way to his elbow, after thoroughly washing his hands, of course, and rolling it out into long, uneven logs. Grizzly's baker hands worked effortlessly over the old mahogany countertop, taking large globs and rolling them under the weight of his tired old paws. Pill was a little slower to follow. He wasn't sure if he had ever done this sort of work before, and decided rather reluctantly to just kind of follow along with the motions of Chirp and Grizzly as they worked, awkwardly copying their movements. After a little while, however, it was enough to jostle something in his memory, and his fingers found their way into a familiar rhythm born of instinct. He had done this before, he realized, although he couldn't guess as to when. While his own loaves weren't nearly as nice as Grizzly's, they were a far step above Chirp's malformed lumps. In bread making, as in most things, there's a sort of art to progressing past satisfactory competence and actually making a good meal. Pill's hands knew enough that he was starting to approach that boundary, his fingers straddling the markers of memory as he worked. When he tried to push through, he could almost make out faces. A plump, smiling woman looking down at him as if she were a giant. The rich smell of flour in the air carried him back to a time and place he remembered more from scent than sight, and every bottle uncorked by Grizzly was like another color splashed across the canvas of his memories, turning from abstract to cubist, cubist to pointillist, and then slowly finding the grasp of realistic portraiture. He could see the woman, and behind her he could see the place he had once worked. No, the place he had once lived. He could almost remember her name, and then a heavy pain passed over his heart. "Well, that's all done with," said Grizzly, clapping his great hands and sending clouds of flour throughout the room. "And in no time at all. Might even be able to sneak in a little nap today, thanks to you boys. There's a lot that needs doing around here, you know." "What has you so busy?" asked Pill. "You don't look busy," said Chirp, staring out into the empty guest room. "Well, I've been getting ready for winter, of course," said Grizzly matter-of-factly. "It's going to be a cold one. Can't you feel it?" Even in the warmth of the hearth and kitchen, Pill had to admit there was still a bite to the air. "It has been pretty chilly," he said, flexing his fingers. There was a heaviness lingering in his limbs. "Pretty chilly," the old man said, laughing. "Pretty chilly, eh? Well, I guess that's a good way of putting it, but real soon those cold winds are going to be howling through the trees like wolves at the moon. Snow brings with it the sleep of all things wild, you know, and if you're smart, you do well to hunker down somewhere warm and sleep through it too. Why do you think I'm getting so much food ready? Sure, the occasional traveler comes my way now and again, and I'm happy to share the bounty when they do, but once that cold wind starts in, hunting ain't going to be so easy anymore. No, best I stock up now so I can stay warm and fed and full through the winter. Spring will come round again soon enough, but until that happens, I don't plan on stepping through those doors. And if you're smart, you'll do much the same. Grizzly looked at Pill carefully, smiling wide and rustling Chirp's auburn hair. You're good kids. You helped me out a turn, and I don't take that sort of thing for granted. How would you two like some mead? Chirp smiled. I would love some, sir. You don't need to be calling me sir, son, the old man snorted. Grizzly works fine. Yes, sir, Mr. Grizzly, sir, said Chirp. Pill looked over into another room further back beyond the kitchen, where a large slab of something red and wet dangled from a hook on the ceiling. It was dripping. A sharp cleaver was embedded in a butcher's block, both of which had been stained red. Are you going to need help with that, too? He asked nervously. Nah, all the good hunting's out for the season anyway. Might be I'll go down to the river and catch something later before it freezes over, but that's more a treat than anything. And it ain't so much work gutting fish if you ain't picky about the bones. Pill's attention drifted to all the animals mounted on the walls. He could see great cuts of meat hanging off more hooks in the back room, or otherwise cut into strips to hang along large racks. Rows and rows of jars filled the shelves as well, packed with pickled roots and other vegetables, all visible through their dark red brine. The smell of vinegar was sharp in the air, and chased by a sweet honey scent. Under it all was the watery copper smell of blood. He thought the sight of it should have surprised him more, maybe even made him nervous, considering he was alone with a great stranger, but oddly enough, he found the sight rather comforting. Grizzly clapped his hands, sending another cloud of flour throughout the room. It bothered Pill that, despite how familiar all of this felt to him, he knew none of it was familiar enough that he had actually been here before. It was like staring into an impression of another's memory, or into the second-hand telling of a stranger's dream. The well-worn and blood-soaked wood brought to mind echoes of black and white patterned tiles. He could imagine a small rug sitting in the corner of his thoughts. Did it say something? Was something on it? Sounds of footsteps muffled through the floor above him so vividly that it took him a moment to realize they were only in his memory, and then his mind snapped back to the very real surroundings of the cabin, his thoughts of forgotten places fading from mind as quickly as they'd come to him. Chirp, we should probably be moving on soon, Pill said quietly. Grizzly was hanging his apron in the back room. You heard what he said about the snow, right? We still don't know how far we have to go to town. Why don't we just stay here then? Chirp asked, browsing through the rows and rows of jars. I like it here. Don't you want to find your mom? Oh, yeah, said Chirp, his smile fading slightly. Do you think she's here, maybe? I don't think so, Chirp, said Pill, tugging at his fleece. If Grizzly hasn't mentioned her by now, she's probably somewhere else. Maybe someone in town will know her. You said she goes there sometimes, right? Yeah. Then I'm sure someone can help us there. Maybe they'll even recognize you. Do you have any friends in town? Oh, lots, said Chirp brightly. Great, maybe we could look for them. Well, there's this old dog that hangs around a lot, said Chirp. He's really friendly as long as you don't try and take his scraps. He bit me once. It was my fault, though. And there are a bunch of cows that like to walk around in the fields. They're really friendly, too, but they're kind of loud. And there are these chickens that hang out in this little wood house that's shaped like a big wood house, and they hide all their eggs in it. You can get at them if you're really quick. I meant people friends, Pill managed to interject. Chirp looked at him confused and then smiled. Oh, then no. Pill sighed. Well, we've got ourselves a bit of free time with the bread all set to baking, Grizzly called. And I promised you boys some mead, didn't I? Said Chirp, who was staring hungrily around the room. Who drinks mead anymore? Bill thought that was an odd choice. All he ever really drank was water, and, well, he couldn't actually remember drinking anything else. It was strange to him what sort of memories were starting to come and go through his head. He could remember concepts well enough, and ideas like telephones and televisions and telemobiles, even if he couldn't remember exactly where he'd seen them before. He knew what a farm was, could even picture one in his head when he tried, but couldn't say in the slightest as to whether or not it was a real place. It was like staring at the illustrations in a children's alphabet book. C was for cat, and he could see one in his mind, but the cat was just an idea. It still felt like the world was playing a trick on him. Like, at any moment the walls could rise like curtains, or the forest itself would part and the farce would come to a sudden end as gaggles of his friends and family, suddenly familiar again, would all reveal themselves as part of one great goof. He kept waiting for it to happen, hoped for it, even though he knew the very idea was absurd. Chirp was waiting beside him with all the patience an 8 to 9-year-old could muster, which meant he was staring greedily at the stew pot over in the main room while his hands flapped at his sides. "We should probably just leave," said Pill. "Why?" Chirp asked, his eyes unmoving from the pot. "We're getting free meat." "Mead. He's giving us free mead." "What's that?" "It's like water, but worse." Chirp's nose scrunched. "Oh. Well, at least there's bread. Mom always says you should never turn down a free meal." "I never trust a free meal," said Pill. "Don't you think Grizzly's too friendly? He didn't even ask us to pay him for the food. Don't you think that's weird?" "I'm a kid," said Chirp. "No one asked me to pay for anything." "Okay, but no one just does nice things for free." "Sure they do." Chirp shoved him. "People love to feed me. Besides, I helped you, and now you're helping me. We're helping each other right now for no reason at all." "Yeah, well," Pill scratched at his head. Uneven tufts of hair caught between his fingers. "You're just a kid. It wouldn't have felt right leaving you in the woods all alone." "Maybe Mr. Grizzly feels the same way about you." Pill had to think at that. After a long silence and some careful consideration, he nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, maybe." "Carefully aged from the freshest honey," Grizzly announced as he walked back into the room. His heavy boots thundered along the floor like a growing storm. "Which I guess means it isn't so fresh anymore. Homemade and spiced with my own secret blend. I hope you boys are thirsty." In his large hand he held 3 wide horns. Not cups or mugs or glasses, but honest-to-goodness horns. He gave one to each of them while keeping the third for himself. Then, popping a corked bottle open with his meaty thumb, poured the gold liquid into 3 equal shares. He downed his own immediately. Cheered somewhat by Chirp's suggestion, and not suspecting the old man would be so crazy as to poison himself along with them, Pill helped himself to a cautious sip. Chirp drank down his own mead in a messy guzzle, and a fair amount found its way to his chin and chest before falling to the floor. "Delicious," Chirp chirped. "Not like worse water at all." Grizzly laughed. "Now who told you that?" Pill sipped from the horn, rising it high to hide his reddening face. The mead was slightly sticky and sweet to the tongue. "It's good," he admitted. "Not my best, though," said Grizzly, eyeing the color carefully while pouring himself some more. "I've made a few so sweet you'd think you were dreaming. Too good to be true they were, liquid gold, but this is certainly very, very, very good, if you don't mind indulging an old man's hubris." "Sure," said Chirp, holding out for a refill. "I never had hubris before, though." The old man laughed and clapped him on the back. Pill worried the force of it would throw Chirp clear across the room, but instead he just burped and laughed, which made Grizzly laugh even harder. "Oh, it's good to have company," the old man said, wiping his eye. "Reminds me of Mama and my brothers and sisters. I haven't seen them in ages." His smile dimmed slightly. Pill could have sworn that Grizzly looked teary-eyed for a moment, but in the moment after that he was all smiles again, drinking heartily right from the bottle. Pill took another polite sip, wondering if he had had any brothers and sisters of his own. He knew he had a mother whose face he could dimly picture, but he couldn't remember his father for the life of him. That made him sad, both for himself and for the unimaginable sort of sorrow one must feel as a parent forgotten by their child. "Looks like you got something on the mind there, kiddo," said Grizzly, who was leading them back to the table by the fire. "Want to talk about it?" "It's nothing," said Pill. This wasn't the sort of problem he felt comfortable sharing with a stranger. But then that was the problem, wasn't it? Without his memories, the whole world felt strange to him, and strange and unknown things were frightening. "I'm just wondering how we're going to make it to town is all." "Well, you follow the road long enough and you'll find your way somewhere," said Grizzly. "Seen more than enough people doing it before. Gets to be I'm not even sure where they're all going anymore, but travelers like you are always on their way somewhere or other. Can't figure they'd be walking if there was nowhere to be." "Do they ever say where they're going?" "Travelers talk, but not that much. Only whispers and such." "I'm great at whispers," Chirp said loudly. "But Mom says I need to practice more, because she doesn't like loud noises." "She doesn't, huh?" said Grizzly. "Not like my mama. She was as loud as they come." Pill's mother was a silence in his head, but he nodded along politely. "You kids did me a good turn helping out with the morning bake and all," Grizzly repeated. Pill hated when people repeated themselves, but he smiled and nodded politely. "I can't be turning you out to the woods with nothing to show for it. I gave you some meat and stew, sure, but I got plenty of that already, so it really ain't much to give at all. And you'll get your bread when it's ready, of course, but I do think there's one more thing I can do for you. Need to do for you." Grizzly turned his heavy head out to the bright windows at the front of the cabin. Pill was curious. "What's that, Mr. Grizzly?" asked Chirp. "Well, it's not exactly a pleasant thing I mean to be saying, which is what makes this so hard and all. Sending you two back into those woods uninformed would be a disservice to the both of you, though, so I need you to listen closely, all right?" Pill's stomach was growing tighter with every word. His eyes looked out the window for the specter he'd met the previous night. Did Grizzly know something about her? "Yes, sir," said Chirp. "I'm listening." "Me too," said Pill, trying to keep his voice even. His face was flat. The old man's wide and easy smile shrunk down to a worried frown, lost somewhere beneath his wild beard. "These woods ain't a safe place to be right now," Grizzly whispered. "You might have noticed that there ain't a lot of other folk on the road, and that ain't for no reason." The straw hat girl was dancing in Pill's mind, bloodied hands reaching for him from the hot spring. Her eyes were burned into his memory. He hid his nerves behind another polite sip of mead. "There's something bad out beyond the wood, and it's coming this way," said Grizzly. "Now, I ain't never seen much myself out there, mind, but you might have noticed I'm a pretty big fella. There's easier prey out there than me for the things in the dark to be creeping up on, but 2 young boys?" He sighed. "Might be safer if you wait out the winter here with me. I got more than enough in the way of provisions for the lot of us, and I can't say I'd mind the company. It's going to be a long cold this year. I could take the 2 of you on forward in the spring if you like, but only once the snows have gone. I won't risk being caught in the cold when everything I need is right here, and you should be thinking the same." Chirp was nodding along, looking as if he was seriously considering the old man's offer. Pill disagreed. He needed to keep moving. He didn't know exactly where to or why it was so important for him to get there, but something inside him was screaming to continue along the road. "I don't know, sir," Pill said carefully. He looked nervously out into the wood, which seemed so tranquil in the morning light. Shadows shifted about softly beyond the far trees. "I really need to be moving on." "Not for nothing, son," said Grizzly, who leaned real close over the table. "But do you even know which way you're headed? I never seen you walking around these parts before, and I'm pretty far from anything. You'd be taking an awful risk walking through that wood alone." "He won't be alone," said Chirp, finishing the last of his 3rd horn of mead. It brightened his smile near to sunlight. "He'll have me with him." "And he'll have me," said Pill, looking to Chirp. He managed to smile. "We'll find our way back, all right." Grizzly leaned back in his heavy armchair. It looked very comfortable. "I suppose you will," he said, smiling softly at the both of them. "In that case, I promised you two a few things, didn't I? That bread of yours should just about be ready, so how about we grab some while it's hot? I got jams and jellies, or honey if you'd like that better. I got a lot of honey." By the time Grizzly was done scrounging through his stores, Chirp's pockets were filled near to burst with freshly made or well-preserved goods. Pill only took a small handful for himself, confident that they would end up in Chirp's belly anyway. The boy bounced constantly with boundless energy, kicking and fidgeting even in his best impressions of standing still. Pill thought it must take a whole farm to keep him fed. When they were both good and stocked up, Grizzly led them to the door. Chirp hugged tightly around the man's tree-trunk legs, sinking his face deep into the fur while murmuring his thanks for all the food. Then he bounded out the door, waving goodbye as he ran to the road. Pill started to follow, nodding politely one more time at the old man before muttering a small, "Thank you." He bundled his fleece tight against the breeze, which quickly chased the warmth of the fire from him. "I meant what I said," the old man cautioned. His eyes were stern. "You two be careful out there. Keep an eye on the road and the other on each other. Don't stop walking until you find yourself somewhere safe, all right? Those cold winds are coming soon, and you best be hunkered down before they get here. And know that if you ever change your minds, you're always welcome to come back any time. You understand?" Pill nodded, seriously considering the old man's words. Now that they were free to leave, the fear that Grizzly might be trying to work a trick or trap on them was starting to fade. Free from fear of ulterior motives, Pill could see more clearly now the kind, if lonely soul that Grizzly really was. He started to wonder if maybe they should stay after all. "Come on!" Chirp shouted. He was already making his way around a bend in the path. "We don't want to be late." Late for what? Pill wondered aloud. It wasn't like they were expected anywhere. Grizzly stood beside him and pushed a meaty paw into his back. "You best be hurrying then," he said, chuckling, "or your friend there's like to lose you. But if you do come back this way, know that old Grizzly'll be here."